This week the class discusses Chapter 6, Consumer Choice and Demand. What are tastes? A consumer's preference for different goods and services. Consider the concept of utility. Total utility is the total satisfaction a consumer derives from consumption. Marginal utility is the change in total utility derived from a one-unit change in consumption of a good. The law of diminishing marginal utility states that the more of a good consumed per period, the smaller the increase in total utility from consuming one more unit, other things constant. From the table, we can derive marginal utility from the total utility. This slide shows total utility you derive from water after jogging 4 miles. This graph shows marginal utility you derive from water after jogging 4 miles. Consumer equilibrium. The condition in which an individual consumer's budget is completely spent and the last dollar spent on each good yields the same marginal utility. Utility is maximized. The table shows how to maximize utility. The example is based on the assumption that total income is $20 and per unit price $4. This table shows how to maximize utility when price changes. The example is based on the assumption that total income is $20 and per unit price $3. The graph shows the relationship between marginal utility and demand curve. Diminishing marginal utility ensures that the demand curve is downward sloping. Consumer surplus. The difference between the maximum amount that a consumer is willing to pay for a given quantity of a good and what the consumer actually pays. Summing individuals' demand to get market demand. The appendix show the relationship between indifference curves and utility maximization. An indifference curve in a two-good world, food and clothing. Combinations of goods along the indifference curve reflect some constant, though unspecified, level of total utility. Slope of the indifference curve indicates marginal rate of substitution, MRS. The MRS indicates the maximum amount of clothing that the consumer is willing to give up to get one more unit of food. Max's indifference map for the example of nuggets and burgers. Example of the indifference map between clothing and food. The law of diminishing marginal rate of substitution. As the consumption of food increases, the amount of clothing that the consumer is willing to give up to get another unit of food declines. The budget line. The budget line reflects all possible combinations of clothing and food that could be purchased, given the prices and the consumer's budget. Effects of a change in income. This graph illustrates utility maximization. Utility is maximized at interaction of indifference curve and the budget line. Effects of a price change and deriving the demand curve. Income and substitution effects.